Hello everyone, welcome to the Audio Precision webinar. Today we'll be discussing hearing aid audio tests, and Joe Bajin will be leading the conversation while providing demonstrations in APX 500 software. My name is Paige, and as the producer of the event, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items before we get started. First, please note this session is being recorded, and after we conclude the webinars this week, I'll be sending out an email with a link to view the recording so you can rewatch as needed. And secondly, we will be taking questions through the chat function in Microsoft Teams. So if you have a question for Joe during the event, please go ahead and submit that, and we will answer those periodically throughout the event. Now we have a lot of information to share with you today. So without further ado, Joe, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Paige, and welcome everyone to the webinar today. Before we begin, I just wanted to point out that I'm part of our global support group. So as many of you know, Audio Precision and GRASS recently merged. We are still two separate companies, two separate brands, but we have merged some of our functions, and one of those is technical support. So we have offices here in the US as well as in Europe, in the UK and in China, all providing technical support on both Audio Precision and GRASS sound and vibration products. All right, so let's get going with the webinar. The agenda for what we're going to cover today, a very brief introduction to hearing aids, and as I say this, I want to point out that I have a lot of expertise in audio analyzers, especially Audio Precision ones. And in terms of hearing aids, I'm really not an expert. So for those of you that work in the industry, you might find this a little bit light on the hearing aid side of things, but hopefully you can learn something about our offerings in audio test. We'll also talk about the ANSI and IEC standards for hearing aid test. We're going to review the test requirements within those standards. Some of the test equipment needs needed to conduct these tests. We'll do a demonstration, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. And of course, you can ask questions during the presentation as well. All right, so a little bit about hearing aids. These are very unique devices from an audio test perspective. One of the key things about them is they're both acoustic in and acoustic out. And that's one of the few devices that I'm aware of in our industry that we have to test of that nature. They're quite complex and marvelous devices. They have at least one and typically more than one microphone. They have a loudspeaker, a power amplifier, a digital signal processor. They're battery powered with some controls, and they fit in a tiny package that may be behind the person's outer ear, or in some cases hidden even inside the ear. And that's just the basics of hearing aids. There are some additional features available on many of the offerings today, such as noise reduction, directional microphones, so that the hearing aid can help to detect the direction that the sound is coming from and act appropriately. Telecoils, these are pickups which can pick up magnetic field so that the audio can be transmitted via a magnetic field rather than acoustically through the air for telephones and spaces like churches that run a loop around the building to help hearing impaired people. Many have wireless connectivity. Bluetooth is becoming very important. Previously, many of the manufacturers had their proprietary Bluetooth protocols for transmitting audio, and the Bluetooth SIG has just introduced a new standard that will make it common to all of the manufacturers, and Bluetooth will become even more important for hearing aids in the future. Many have remote controls. They can be controlled via apps on a smartphone, for example. Some have direct audio input, a little input jack where you can transmit analog audio from another device directly into the hearing aid. Some have variable programming. So the program that is controlling the digital signal processing can be changed on the fly to help users have better hearing in certain environments than in other environments, depending on the use case. And many have synchronization. So if you have a left side hearing aid as well as a right side hearing aid, there can be they can work together to improve the listening experience for the user. So very complex devices. This is slide just showing the hearing aid styles. So on the left here, the larger ones are called behind the ear or BTE, and the body of the hearing aid fits behind the ear, the outer ear. These have a hook called an ear hook that hangs over the top of the ear, and typically there would be a plastic tube transmitting the audio from within. So there's a loudspeaker inside the device. The loudspeaker is called a receiver in the hearing aid industry, just as it is for telephony. So the receiver is inside the body of the device, and the sound is transmitted through a plastic tube into an ear mold inside the ear. Next, we have a smaller version of this, a mini behind the ear. Next over, we have one that's similar, but called a receiver in the canal. So this one doesn't have the speaker or receiver inside the body. The speaker or the receiver fits inside the ear canal, and the signal is transmitted via wires from the power amplifier in the device to the speaker inside the ear. Next over, we have the in the ear. This is somewhat like an in-ear monitor that musicians use. So you have, in this case, the microphones on the outside and the sound conduction on the inside. So there's a larger one shown here on the left. Next, we have an in the canal, a smaller one that is partly inserted inside the ear canal. There are even smaller ones yet that fit completely inside the canal. And finally, over on the right, we have a completely invisible in the canal. So this would be small and inserted so deeply inside the ear canal that it's not even visible from the outside. Let's have a look at the hearing aid test standards. So one of the main ones is the American National Standards Institute, Acoustical Society of America, ANSI ASA S3.22. This was last updated in 2014 and reaffirmed in 2020, and it covers the specification of hearing aid characteristics. This standard is mainly used for production test of hearing aids. A very similar standard is the IEC 60118 Part 7. So the 60118 group is a whole group of international standards on hearing aids, and Part 7 is titled Measurement of the Performance Characteristics of Hearing Aids for Production, Supply, and Delivery Quality Assurance Purposes. So it too is intended for production test, and it's really very similar to the ANSI S3.22 standard. Another important standard in the 60118 group is Part 0. This is measurement of the performance characteristics of hearing aids. It covers many of the same tests, but it's intended more for research and development than production tests. And this would be used, for example, if you're developing a new type of device and you want to specify its characteristics for a data sheet, for example, or for introduction to a certain country. So it has many of the same tests, but it does cover a little bit wider frequency range, and it has some extra tests as well. Some of the measurements that we'll cover today that are documented in these standards. So we have the OSPL 90 frequency response. Now I have some subsequent slides that will talk about these in more detail, but I'll just give you the names for now. Next, we have the full-on gain frequency response, the basic frequency response, total harmonic distortion, the equivalent input noise, battery current, steady state input-output, attack and release, intermodulation distortion, and the SPL-IV curve. So let's have a look at what some of these measurements are in detail. So OSPL 90 stands for output sound pressure level for an input sound level of 90 dB SPL. So for most of these measurements, we measure the sound pressure level in the coupler. The input level in this case is 90 dB SPL. The gain of the instrument, the hearing aid, is a full-on gain, or maximum volume. And the frequency range is 200 Hertz to 5 kilohertz for the production test standards, and extends up to 8 kilohertz for the Part 0 or R&D standard. The results would be the OSPL 90 curve, which looks like the one, may look like the one shown here on the right. One of the metrics we want to know from this is the maximum OSPL. So we simply pick off the maximum value of the level or the gain at any frequency. And then another metric is called the HFA OSPL 90. Now HFA stands for high frequency average, and it's derived by taking the average of the level or the gain at 3 frequencies, and those frequencies are 1 kilohertz, 1.6 kilohertz, and 2.5 kilohertz. So we simply take the average of the decibel levels at those frequencies, and that's the HFA gain or level. The full-on gain, or FOG 50, again, we're measuring the sound pressure level in the coupler. In this case, the input level is 50 dB/SPL, and the hearing aid is at full-on gain. We cover the same frequency range, and the results in this case are the gain curve, as shown on the right here. And we want to measure also the high-frequency average FOG. Another important metric is called the reference test setting. In this case, we're measuring the HFA gain, and that's, of course, the gain averaged at those 3 HFA frequencies of 1, 1.6, and 2.5 kilohertz. The input level is 60 dB/SPL, and we need to adjust the gain of the hearing aid until the gain is equal to the HFA OSPL 90 minus 77 dB. Now, the result here is called the RTS, or the reference test setting, and the gain at RTS is called the reference test gain. Now, for analog hearing aids, this level is found iteratively. You turn on the sound pressure level, you measure the HFA gain, and you adjust the volume control until you achieve the reference test gain. For modern digital hearing aids, the RTS can be set programmatically. So during the tests of a digital hearing aid, you would have a programmer connected, and you would just send commands to the hearing aid over the control interface. The frequency response is an important measurement. So in this case, again, we're measuring the SPL in the coupler. The input level is 50 dB/SPL. The gain of the hearing aid is at the reference test setting, or reference test gain. The same frequency range is covered. And the results here, the main one, of course, is the frequency response curve. Then we have the HFA 50, the high frequency average. And from this, we compute the frequency range of the hearing aid. Now, the frequency range is found by taking the horizontal line at the high frequency average level. We take an offset 20 dB lower than the HFA level. And the point where that horizontal line crosses the curve is F1 at the lower end and F2 at the higher end, and that's the frequency range of the device, F1 to F2. Another important measurement as part of this basic frequency response curve is the tolerance method, and this is specified in both the ANSI and the IEC Part 7 standard. So this is based on the response for a model representing the product, and the limits are constructed based on that model. So we have a low frequency range, which extends from 1.25 F1 or 200 hertz, whichever is higher, up until 2 kilohertz, and the limits within that range are plus or minus 4 dB. And then at the higher frequency range from 2K up to it's 2 kilohertz to 4K, or 0.8 times the F2, whichever is lower. And in this upper range, the limits are plus or minus 6 dB. So you can see the limits are plus or minus 4 in the lower range and plus or minus 6 in the higher range. Now, this is a template, and the way the standards are written, it's from the past when people would use transparencies, and the idea was you would print out the measured curve of the device. You would have a transparency containing the limits based on the model curve, and you would overlay the transparency on top of the curve, adjust it vertically until the measured curve is centered in limits, but you were also allowed to adjust it horizontally by up to 10%, plus or minus 10% in frequency to see if the measured curve fits within the limits. So of course today no one uses transparencies, and this is all done via software. We have a brand new derived result in the APX software called ANSI S3.22 Fit Limits to Data, and I'll show that during the demonstration later on. For harmonic distortion, we measure the sound pressure level in the coupler. The gain of the device is the reference test setting, and there are 3 or 4 frequencies specified with levels. So we have 500 hertz at 70 dB/SPL, 800 at 70, 1.6 at 65, and in some cases 3.2 kilohertz at 60 dB/SPL. The result here is just the total harmonic distortion in percent. The equivalent input noise, in this case, the input is off, so there's no signal generated. We're just measuring the noise in the coupler, and we call that noise L0, the sound pressure level in the coupler with no input. The gain is set to the reference test gain. The frequency bandwidth of the measurement is 200 hertz to 5 kilohertz, and the result that we're looking for is L0 minus the HFA gain of 50, and that's the defined as the equivalent input noise. The battery current is also very important. These are battery-powered devices, and of course we want to know how long do we expect the device to last on a single battery or a single charge of a rechargeable battery, and therefore we measure the battery current when the device is in use. So the input level is 65 dB/SPL. The gain is set to the reference test gain. It's a frequency, a sine wave at 1 kilohertz, and we measure the battery current in milliamps. The steady state input-output is a metric for hearing aids with automatic gain control. So in this case, we have an input level that we step from 50 dB/SPL to 90 in 5 dB steps. The gain of the device is set at the reference test setting, and the frequencies called out are one or more of 250, 500, 1K, 2K, or 4 kilohertz. And that the result we're looking for is the input-output curve as shown on the right here. So you can see for this device, it's quite linear from about 50 to 57 dB/SPL, and then it starts to roll off as the automatic gain control circuit kicks in. Another measurement for hearing aids with automatic gain control is the attack and release. So here we're generating a sine signal at any of these 4 frequencies, 250, 500, 1K, or 2 kilohertz. Now, the way this is done, we abruptly increase the level from 55 dB/SPL to 90. This would be the envelope of the curve here on the input side, and on the output of the hearing aid, we'll see an overshoot, and then this the signal settles back to its steady state level. And the attack time is the time that it takes from the time of the jump until the level settles within plus or minus 3 dB of the steady state value. Similarly, on the release side, we have a step decrease in level from 90 to 55 dB/SPL here. And we measure the release time as the time that it takes for the envelope of the signal to settle within plus or minus 4 dB of the final signal. Some other metrics for difference frequency distortion or intermodulation distortion. So Audio Precision has had intermodulation distortions measurements in our analyzers for many years, but we've added new measurements for the hearing aid test just recently because they're a little bit different from the ones that are typically used in audio test. So for ANSI S3.22, it is called difference frequency distortion. The gain of the hearing aid is at RTS, and the input signal is two sine waves of equal amplitude at 62 dB/SPL. And the 2 frequencies are F1 and F2, where the difference between them, F1 minus F2, is 125 hertz. Note that for the ANSI standard, F1 is the higher of the 2 frequencies. As we'll see in a minute, for the IEC standard, F1 is the lower of the 2 frequencies, but very similar metrics for the 2 standards. So the distortion products for ANSI are the levels or the distortion at F1 minus F2, 2F1 minus F2, and 2F2 minus F1. And the result that we want is the total difference frequency distortion as a function of frequency. Now, as you can see, we have a measurement in the APX software here called ANSI S3.22 IMD frequency sweep. And this just conducts the measurement and gives you the required curve that's spelled out in the standard. In the case of IEC 60118 Part 0, it's called intermodulation distortion, but it's very much the same measurement. Here again, you have 2 sines at equal amplitude. In this case, they're just 1 dB different in level. Here, the frequencies are F1 and F2, where F2 being the higher frequency is greater than F1 by 125 hertz. And in this case, there are just 2 distortion products, F2 minus F1 and 2F1 minus F2. And the result called out in the standard is the total difference frequency distortion versus frequency F2. And as shown here on the right, we've added a special measurement in APX to do this IEC 60118 Part 0 IMD frequency sweep. This is one of the measurements for hearing aids with a telecoil. It's called the SPLIV, or sound pressure level in a vertical magnetic field. So in this case, again, we're measuring the SPL in the coupler with the gain of the hearing aid at RTS, but the signal in this case is not acoustic input. It's a magnetic field being generated by the loop in the hearing aid test box. Now the standard calls for a loop current of 31.6 milliamps per meter, and the actual current depends on the length of the loop in the test box. For the test box that I'm using here today, TBS25, the current is 7.9 milliamps. And the standard calls out a sweep of this frequency from 200 hertz to 8 kilohertz. Now for this method, particularly, we use a measurement in the APX software called the bandpass frequency sweep. It sweeps the signal and uses a very narrow bandpass filter that's tuned to the frequency of the signal, and it uses a bandpass selectivity called window width, which is based on FFT analysis. So it can have a very, very narrow filter that it sweeps with the signal. The result here is the level versus frequency. So in this case, this is simply a bandpass frequency sweep measurement in APX that has been renamed to SPL-IV frequency response. Let's talk about the equipment requirements. So I've mentioned a test box or acoustic test chamber, and that's very, very fundamental to the test here. It's used to isolate the measurement environment from the ambient environment for noise reduction. It also has accessories built in to facilitate the testing. We need a measurement microphone. It's very important. The standards call for a 2cc coupler. So this is a simple coupler that has an internal volume of 2 cubic centimeters. That's standard for hearing aid tests. We need a sound level calibrator. So we want to be able to set the sensitivity of the microphone within our audio measurement software. It's also a good idea to check that we have a good signal connection with the microphone because we're measuring sound levels voltages at quite a low level, typically with a measurement microphone. We also need a dummy microphone. I'll explain what that's for in a subsequent slide. And of course, we need an audio analyzer. Now, accessories for the audio analyzer include a power amplifier to drive the loudspeaker, a power amplifier to drive the telecoil loop, a microphone power module to provide signal conditioning and power the measurement microphone, and a battery simulator to power the hearing aid and to enable us to measure the current drawn by the battery. So I've put these devices all in blue, the same color as the audio analyzer, because I'll be featuring today our APX 511 audio analyzer, which has these features built in. In terms of a test box or sound test chamber, this is one of the most common ones used in the industry. It's made by a Danish company called Interacoustics. We don't really have any affiliation with them, but it is the most popular one used in the industry. It offers about 45 dB of noise isolation from the environment. It's specified to be anechoic at frequencies greater than 500 hertz. The built-in loudspeaker here has a nice, very smooth and relatively flat response from about 50 hertz to 88 kilohertz. The response without any equalization is about plus or minus 3 dB, which is quite good for a loudspeaker. It has a built-in loop for the telecoil measurements. And there's a patch panel in the front that you can't really see here that's connected to a patch panel on the back of the box, and that conveys many of the connections from inside the box to outside for convenience. I just wanted to point out here that the working surface inside the box is quite small. It's less than about 6 by 6 inches or about 15 by 15 centimeters. So really you don't have a lot of room to work inside the box, but luckily hearing aids are quite small, so it's definitely workable. Now we need a measurement microphone, and as I mentioned, the working space inside the chamber is quite small, so it's nice to have a small measurement microphone. And our sister company Grass here has come up with a very nice short preamplifier called the Grass 26CK. And with this, for this measurement, you need a pressure capsule, a pressure response capsule. Grass has quite a large variety of pressure capsules for half-inch microphones. Typical one would be this 40AO, which it's a CCP type microphone capsule, and it has a nominal sensitivity of 12.5 millivolts per Pascal. So over here, I'm showing the capsule and the preamp combined. And as you can see, the total length of the device is about 37 millimeters from tip to tip. So it's a nice small half-inch microphone set that can be used inside that small chamber. And here we have AP's dummy microphone, which, as you can see, is about the same physical size and shape as the measurement microphone. We'll talk about that in a minute. Now this microphone, the one I'm showing here, is two components, which you can buy separately, but from Grass you can also get these as a system. So the 46AO-S2 is the microphone system. It provides the two together. They're calibrated as a unit and programmed with TEDS, the transducer electronic data sheet. And then there's also a version with a built-in right angle adapter. I don't have a picture of that one, but I have a drawing here. So you can see the preamplifier on the bottom, the right angle adapter, and then the pressure capsule on the top. So either of these is quite nice for working inside that small chamber. In terms of the 2cc coupler, Grass offers the RA0038 2cc coupler, which is typically used for these tests, and it requires a half-inch pressure microphone. This meets the requirements of both the ANSI and IEC standards for couplers for hearing aids. And as we're showing here on the left, for in-the-ear hearing aids, you need a coupler type HA1. It has an opening to the cavity that's sealed with a sealant like putty or blue tack, and you would place the hearing aid against the cavity like that. For a behind-the-ear hearing aid with an ear hook, you would have either a metal or typically a plastic connecting tube connecting into the HA2 type coupler. So the Grass RA0038 comes in a small kit like this, and as you can see, it's got the parts to configure it as an HA1 or an HA2 type, so it can test both in the ear and behind the ear hearing aids. Now, in addition to the basic accessories for hearing aids that I've shown on the previous slides, Grass has a number of special purpose products that are useful for hearing aid test. One here is there's 0.4cc coupler. This can go to measure to higher frequencies than the 2cc coupler. It's especially important for children that have higher frequencies of hearing, and I believe it's about to become standardized as a model for testing hearing aids for children. They also have a 2cc coupler for 1-inch microphones here, and then here we're showing the type 711 coupler, or the ear simulator, it's called. It meets the current standard IEC 60318 Part 4, and this comes in several versions. There's a standard version, a high frequency version, and then a high resolution version. And of course, lots of cables available from Grass to connect the microphones as needed for the test. In terms of a calibrator, so the calibrator is used to set the sensitivity of the microphone within the audio measurement software, and it's also a good idea to check the connectivity from the microphone back to the analyzer. We're often measuring very small, millivolt level voltages here, and it's good to know that we have a good connection. So you can do this with the sound level calibrator. It emits a known sound level at a specified frequency. Now, this calibrator is one of the nicest ones that I've used in my career. It has two frequencies available, both 250 hertz and 1 kilohertz. And it's nice to have the 250 because that can be used to calibrate ear simulators, which require a 250 hertz calibrator because of a resonance in the ear simulator cavity. This one has two sound pressure levels, 94 and 114 dBSVL. It has a built-in feedback microphone to compensate for fluctuations in atmospheric pressure. and a nice digital display that shows both the SPL and the frequency, and can also display the temperature, the barometric pressure, and the relative humidity. Now, I promised to indicate the use of the dummy microphone, and we'll cover that in this slide. So there are two ways of doing these tests. One is by the reference method, I think it's called. And in that case, you would use two microphones, one inside the coupler and another at the test point in the sound field. And using the two microphones, one would measure the sound field and input to the hearing aid. The other measures the output from the hearing aid in the coupler. Now, that's, of course, a great way to do things, but it requires two measurement microphones and a two-channel audio analyzer. And as much as we would love to sell you twice as many microphones and two-channel audio analyzers, you can do these measurements with a single microphone using what's called the substitution method. So in this case, when you're calibrating the sound field, you would put the reference microphone at the test point, the center of the blue dot or blue circle here on the surface, and you would place the dummy microphone, which is approximately the same size and shape as the measurement microphone, inside the coupler. And then when you're ready to do the measurements, you would flip those two around, and now we have the dummy microphone that replaces the reference microphone, and the reference microphone is placed inside the coupler. Let's talk about our APX 511 hearing instrument analyzer. So this is the analyzer that I'll be using here today. It's a specialized model for hearing instrument test.